Keep your eyes on this bird, that little black bird, right there on the branch. Watch what it does. And it's gone. It just turned into that. A floating black face with two burning blue eyes and a glowing blue grin bouncing at you out of the dark. That is not a mask. That is not two birds. That is the exact same animal, and it just folded its own body into something that looks like it crawled out of a nightmare. Now here's the part that should genuinely mess with your head. This bird should be dead. By every single rule of evolution you have ever been taught, survival of the fittest, blend in, don't get eaten, stay alive, this animal is doing everything wrong. It is screaming its location to every predator in the forest. It is wearing a costume that slows it down and lights it up like a target. Nature should have deleted this thing from the planet a million years ago. Instead, the jungles of New Guinea are packed with them. Dozens of species, each one more ridiculous than the last. Each one a walking, dancing insult to the whole idea of survival of the fittest. So one of two things has to be true. Either everything you know about evolution is wrong, or there is a second force out there, hiding in plain sight, strong enough to completely override survival itself. A force so strange it made Charles Darwin physically ill. There is. And this bird is what it builds when nothing stands in its way. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So let's start with that rule. The one this bird is trampling all over. Because it's the one bit of evolution everybody thinks they know. Survival of the fittest. The animals that survive are the ones best at staying alive. Fast enough to escape. Camouflaged enough to hide. Tough enough to make it to morning. Everything an animal has is supposed to be there because it helped its ancestors not die. So look at this bird again. Those insane feathers do not help it survive. At all. They're the opposite of camouflage. They're loud, they're bright, they scream "Here I am" to every predator in the forest. They cost a fortune in energy to grow. They can make it harder to fly. By the cold logic of survival, a male bird of paradise is walking around wearing a giant neon "Eat Me" sign for no survival reason whatsoever. Picture the worst designed prey animal you can imagine. Now give it a full-time job dancing loudly out in the open. That's what we're looking at. It should be a disaster. It should have been wiped out. And yet the rainforests of New Guinea are absolutely full of these things. Dozens of species, each one more ridiculous than the last. So something is very wrong with the simple story. Something else is shaping these birds. Something strong enough to override survival itself. Something powerful enough to make an animal invest in being pretty, even when being pretty is actively trying to get it killed. And figuring out what that was took one of the biggest ideas Darwin ever had, and it started with him staring at a feather and feeling sick. Here's the story. Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest guy, had a problem, and the problem was the peacock. He reportedly said that the sight of a peacock's tail feather made him feel physically ill. It's a real quote, and it's a great one. The father of evolution, made queasy by a single feather, not because it was ugly, because it didn't make sense. His whole theory was built on survival, and here was this enormous, heavy, gaudy tail that clearly made the peacock slower and more visible and easier to catch. It was survival negative. By his own logic, it should not exist. And the bird of paradise is the peacock's problem turned all the way up to 11. If a peacock's tail bothered Darwin, a bird that folds itself into a glowing face would have put him in bed for a week. So Darwin worked out a second engine, a second force that drives evolution alongside survival and sometimes directly against it. He called it sexual selection. There are, in other words, two great forces shaping every animal alive: the struggle to survive and the struggle to be chosen. And the second one, it turns out, can be every bit as powerful as the first. And the idea is simple, but it's huge. It goes like this. It doesn't actually matter how good you are at surviving if you never reproduce. Your genes only make it to the next generation if you find a mate. So if, for some reason, the females of a species start preferring a particular trait, say, a slightly flashier feather, then the males with that trait get chosen, they breed, and they pass it on. Even if that same trait makes them a little easier to kill. And here's the wild part. This can run away with itself. The females prefer flashy, so flashy males breed, so the next generation is flashier. So females now have even flashier options, and they pick the flashiest of those. Round and round, generation after generation, the trait gets pushed further and further, more extreme, more absurd, more costly, driven not by what keeps the animal alive, but purely by what the females find attractive. Beauty, chasing beauty, with no breaks. It's a feedback loop, and feedback loops run to extremes. It's the same reason fashions spiral, or trends get more and more over the top until they collapse under their own weight. Except here it's been running, uninterrupted, for millions of years, with the survival of an entire lineage riding on it. That is the force that built the bird of paradise. And New Guinea, it turns out, is the one place on Earth where it was allowed to go completely off the rails. But before we get to why here, look at just how far this force pushed these birds, because it is genuinely hard to believe. Take the transformation from the start, the one that turns a bird into a floating face. That's the superb bird of paradise, and the male's whole body is a costume built for one pose. Folded up and resting, he's an unremarkable little black bird, but the moment a female lands nearby, he flips a switch. The oval shape, the fake eyes, the fake smile, it's an abstract sculpture the bird assembles out of itself, and it evolved entirely because females, over countless generations, kept preferring males who did it slightly better. And it's not just the shape. He pairs it with a dance, a rapid, precise, side-to-side bounce, snapping his tail feathers to make a clicking rhythm, all while keeping that fake face aimed perfectly at the female the entire time. It's choreography, a costume and a dance and a stage act in an animal the size of your fist. Now stack another one on top. Some birds of paradise have taken this to a place that literally borders on the impossible, and it involves the color black. You'd think black is just black. It isn't. Black is just a surface soaking up light instead of bouncing it back, and most black surfaces are actually pretty bad at it. The blackest black you can normally get still reflects a bit of light, but several birds of paradise have evolved feathers with a microscopic structure so fine that it traps light and refuses to let it back out. These feathers absorb up to around 99.95% of the light that hits them, which means when light lands on this bird, almost none of it comes back. Your eye sees a hole, a void, a patch of feathers so black it barely registers as a surface at all. That is not a normal black. That is close to the darkest material humans have ever manufactured in a lab, grown on a bird, in a jungle. We spent years of research and serious money building materials that black. The bird just grew it, because it worked on a date. And here's why it's genius. When you put a patch of that super black right next to a patch of bright glowing color, the black gives your eye nothing to compare against. No edge, no shading, no depth, and the bright color next to it looks like it's practically radioactive, like it's glowing from within. Your brain has no reference point for how dark that black is, so it overcorrects, and the colors leap out of it like they're lit from behind. The birds evolved their own optical illusion. They grew a black so deep it makes their colors look supernatural, purely because it made the males more dazzling to a watching female. Think about that. Sexual selection didn't just shape a feather here. It engineered a material that rivals human technology to win a beauty contest in a bird most people have never heard of. And the females running this contest are ruthless. This is the part people miss. We look at these males and think, wow, evolution made something beautiful. But the males aren't the artists. The females are. The male is just the paintbrush. The female is the one deciding what gets painted. Every ridiculous feather, every dance move, every glowing color exists because generations of females sat there, watched males perform, and judged them. And they are incredibly picky. In some species, a single dominant male does almost all the mating in an area, while dozens of other perfectly good males get rejected over and over and pass on nothing. One winner. Everyone else, genetically a dead end. The stakes for these males could not possibly be higher, which is exactly why the displays got so insane. Imagine putting everything you have into a performance, your entire evolutionary purpose, and getting turned down 20 times in a row. That's a male bird of paradise's normal life. The female is holding auditions, and the standards are brutal, and she is not impressed easily. She'll watch a full performance, tilt her head, and just leave. And that brutality is exactly the pressure that keeps sharpening these displays into something more and more extreme. The males didn't decide to become living artwork. The females demanded it, one rejection at a time, for millions of years. And the females are picky for a good reason. A male who can afford to grow a costume like that, keep it in perfect condition, and dance for hours without collapsing, is a male whose genes are clearly excellent. The display is basically a fitness report she can watch in real time. But this raises the obvious question. This kind of thing could, in principle, happen anywhere. So why did it explode here, on this one island, more than anywhere else on the planet? And the answer is beautiful, because it comes back to survival after all, just in reverse. Remember, the whole problem with being gaudy is that it's dangerous. It gets you eaten. In most of the world, sexual selection can only push so far before survival slams on the brakes, because a male that's too flashy simply gets killed before he can breed, and the runaway stops. But New Guinea is special. For most of its history, this island has had very few large predators hunting in the trees. No monkeys, no squirrels competing for the same food, and crucially, not many things able to easily catch an adult bird up in the canopy. New Guinea broke off and drifted in relative isolation, and a lot of the predators that shape bird life everywhere else, the big cats, the tree-climbing hunters, the monkeys, simply never arrived. On top of that, the rainforest is rich and stable, packed with fruit, so food is relatively easy to find. Put those two things together, and you get something remarkable. You get birds with time on their hands and safety in the trees. A male that isn't spending every waking second running from death or scraping for his next meal is a male who can afford to spend hours a day doing nothing but dancing. Some of them even clear and tidy a little patch of the forest floor first, a stage, removing every leaf and stick so nothing distracts from the show. That's an animal with real time on its hands. And a bright, ridiculous costume isn't the death sentence it would be somewhere else, because there's so little up there trying to eat him. New Guinea took the brakes off. Everywhere else, evolution builds a beautiful male, and then a predator eats him, and the experiment ends there. Here, the experiment just kept running. It removed the survival penalty that keeps beauty in check everywhere else, and it let sexual selection run, unopposed, for millions of years. That's why this island, and almost only this island, produced the most extravagant birds on Earth. Beauty ran wild here because, for once, it was safe to. Take these same birds and drop their ancestors into a forest full of hawks and cats, and none of this ever happens. The gaudy ones die, the plain ones live, and you end up with a normal, sensible, forgettable brown bird. New Guinea is the reason we got the other version instead. Safety, it turns out, is what lets an animal get weird. So here's what a bird of paradise really is, and it's a bigger idea than just a pretty animal. It's living proof that survival is not the only thing evolution cares about. That survival of the fittest is only half the story. The full story has two authors. One writes for survival, cold and practical. The other writes for beauty, and doesn't care what it costs. Right next to it, sometimes fighting it, is this other force. Evolution by pure preference, by taste, by beauty for its own sake, and given the right conditions it can build things that survival never would. These birds are what happens when life is freed, just a little, from the grind of staying alive, and allowed to chase something else entirely. It's evolution making art, basically, the moment it gets a little breathing room. And the fact that it produced something this beautiful, with no plan and no designer, just millions of tiny choices made by picky females, is honestly one of the most wonderful things in all of nature. And there's a lovely final twist buried in their name. When the first bird of paradise skins reached Europe, centuries ago, the traders had removed the legs and feet to prepare them. So Europeans, holding these impossible, dazzling feathered things with no feet, came up with the only explanation that fit. These birds, they decided, had no legs because they never needed to land. Why would something this heavenly ever come down to the dirt with the rest of us? They must float, endlessly, in the air of paradise itself, never touching the earth, feeding on nothing but dew and sunlight. That's literally where the name comes from. They were, Quite seriously, believed to be birds from heaven. And honestly, look at one transform into a glowing alien face on a branch in the dark, and you can kind of see how they got there. But New Guinea's masterpiece isn't its most bizarre resident, because also hidden in these mountains is a creature that isn't beautiful at all, that most people would walk straight past, and that is arguably far stranger than any bird. An animal so ancient it lays eggs like a reptile but feeds milk like a mammal, that hunts using a sixth sense we don't have, and that was so rare science genuinely believed it was extinct, gone, lost forever, for over 60 years. And then, just recently, a camera in the jungle caught it, alive, moving through the leaf litter as if it had never left. That's where we're going next. If your brain enjoyed that as much as mine did, you know what to do. Subscribe, because we are working our way through the entire lost continent of SAHUL, and it does not run out of impossible animals. And drop me a comment, which one should I do next? I read all of them, and it genuinely decides what gets made. And if you want to see the poisonous songbird I mentioned earlier, the one you cannot touch, that video's waiting for you right here. Go on.